Then Farooq Engineer blasted to 100 almost before lunch at Madras against the West Indies in 1967. Next to hit the headlines was Mansoor Ali Khan Pataudi, first with a fighting 100 at Headingley in the summer of 67.
Short third man. Oliveira bowls, Pataudi catches, there's his century. 4 runs, wide of third man's left hand.
And later that same year, Pataudi scored 75 and 85 in 2 test innings at Melbourne, sufficient to move critics to label him the Nawab of Headingley and Melbourne.
As the series progressed, we tended to get more confident and do better. In fact, we should have won the last test at Brisbane, which we lost by about 25 odd runs, if I remember correctly. So we were getting into a team sort of spirit by the end of the tour. And this was the tour of Australia after 20 years, after Amarnath's team had been there in 47. So a lot of things were strange to us. Nobody had been there before. And it took time for the team to settle. And by the time we got to New Zealand, I think we all knew pretty well what we had to do.
Was it also a factor that New Zealand weren't as strong as the Australians that helped you to do better?
I think that was certainly one factor. And the other more important factor was the fact that we now came on wickets which were slower, a little spongier, and gave much more purchase to our spinners than the Australian wickets, which were a bit harder. And throughout that New Zealand series, the spinners really did themselves very proud. And I think a number of catches were taken, more catches than perhaps during any other 4 test match series. So we improved our fielding. As we went on with our confidence, it also improved.
So to look back on that first test at Dunedin, and it happened to be India's first ever victory abroad, what would be your main memories?
I think what comes straight to mind is Ramakant Desai's innings with a broken jaw. He has always been a very tough player, but this was a remarkable effort. And the way he played the innings gave us a lot of confidence, a lot of hope. And apart from the fact that Michael Dowling also got a very good 100, we realized that if we did play to the best of our ability, that we were quite capable of beating New Zealand.
And we also had some fine performances from Wadekar and Prasanna.
Yes, Wadekar came into his own on those slow wickets. He found the harder wickets in Australia, where he tended to play slightly across the line of the ball on the off stump. He was getting caught behind and missing and playing a sort of bane of a left-hander anyway. And 1 or 2 of our other main batsmen didn't score as heavily as one expected in Australia. But on these slow wickets, people like Rusi Surti, Wadekar and so on, they came into their own and did pretty well.
And what about Prasanna?
Prasanna again found, well, he couldn't get many LBWs, which annoyed him. But he found that he could turn the ball more. He'd bowled magnificently in Australia also with a limited onside field. And here he got more purchase, more turn, didn't have the same class of batsmen. They would tend to lunge forward or to heave. So we basically put 3 men close and 3 men in the deep. So either they were caught bat-pad, or if they heaved, they were caught on the boundary line.
But having won that first test so comfortably, you immediately went on to lose the second one. Why was this the case?
I think it was just one of those things. I can't explain exactly why, but we knew in our minds that by the time the first test was finished that we intended to win the series, and we stood a very good chance. It's just one of those things. We went on to win the other 2 test matches reasonably well. You call it an aberration of some kind. Perhaps we were not as professional as we should have been.
But overall, the series was very, very satisfactory. And apart from the fact that Prasanna, Wadekar and Surti did well, and you also mentioned the fielding, what was the cohesion like in the team performance in general?
I think you'll find that any team which is winning tends to be fairly cohesive. It was more of a problem in Australia, where you were losing, that one had to tell the boys to keep going and not to lose heart. But once the team starts winning, they themselves become proud of their own achievements, and therefore it's much easier to keep them going as a team. And I think not only did we enjoy cricket because we were winning, but we enjoyed New Zealand a great deal because it is a lovely country.
And what about the opposition? Dowling and Motts.
Well, Motts, of course, is a very fine bowler, and Dowling played us pretty well. He got off the front foot, which was the best thing to do against the spinners, and he got a lovely 200 also, if I remember, against us. He was a fine player, but we found the majority of New Zealand batsmen tended to lose patience and then go for the big shot, the big heave, for which we had these 2 or 3 players on the boundary line.
And that obviously made a fairly crucial difference.
Yes, it did, because we took so many catches that I don't think India had ever taken so many in any tour.
And the high water mark for India on that tour was the bowling of Erapalli Prasanna. In batting, Ajit Wadekar distinguished himself. And in terms of all-round performances, it was Rusi Surti who was the pick of the players.
While this was admittedly not an insignificant achievement, it was, to be absolutely honest, nothing to write home about, for victory over New Zealand in those days was only to be expected. In short, defeating one of